0.1 is not an error. It's the soul. If there really is an answer, where is it? It's in 0.1. 0.1. I always thought 0.1 was an error. But it wasn't. It wasn't an error, it was an ideology. Hello, this is Moko. Korea's reactionary industry once grew so rapidly that it surprised the world, and its speed and expansion were the pride and sorrow of the country. Engineers believed that efficiency and speed were the future, and there was even an air of optimism that Japan was an old country clinging to its past glory. However, the moment the Japanese government announced the tightening of export controls in 2025, that earthquake began to crumble, shielded by sound. Materials stopped, production lines stopped, and it became clear that Korean companies, the high-speed production model that Korean companies had been so proud of, were fragile castles. So what is true technology, and what is integrity? We will look at this quiet and cruel reality from the perspective of one Korean engineer. Please watch until the end. I am an engineer working for a magnetic reactionary company. I had been in the department for quite some time and had been told that I was a potential leader or something. To be honest, I didn't feel bad about it and I thought I had a fair amount of ability. That's what people in our industry have been saying for a long time. Japan's era is over. Korea is the main player now. We were taught this as a matter of course at school and at work. Japan is a country that clings to old ways of doing things, and we are the new generation that conquers the world with speed. I believe this without a doubt. One day during lunch break, I was eating my usual lunch in the cafeteria with my colleagues, joking around. I heard that Japanese engineers spend 2 or 3 years just to make a single screw. No, the times are more about efficiency and speed. Taking it slow and careful is just a waste these days. Everyone was laughing. I seriously believed this too. They said that the fact that Japan was preserving old technology was proof that it was falling behind the times. But that afternoon, the atmosphere changed. As I was working in the lab, people started to murmur. Someone looked at their smartphone and their face turned scared. They said that Japan was tightening its export controls. At that moment, I didn't get it. Because the materials would stop. Could something like that really happen? But the atmosphere around me suddenly became tense. Someone said in a trembling voice, "The stock prices? They've started to fall." The fall was drastic. I thought it was a joke. But by the end of the day, the chart had plummeted like a cliff. The stocks of the reactionary companies that we had been so confidently laughing at had mercilessly turned red. The atmosphere in the factory the next day was completely different from the day before. Even the managers, who usually acted relaxed, were walking with a flustered expression and everyone was speaking quietly. In the midst of all this, my subordinate, number 4, came running up to me. We switched to domestically produced materials, but there are some problems. The way he said this was more than just a joke, and I had a bad feeling about it. The moment I checked the data, my heart skipped a beat. The defect rate was 87%. That can't be. Well, it's possible, but it's a number that shouldn't be there. The cause was simple. The materials we had been importing from Japan couldn't be used. That's why we switched to low-quality materials from domestic manufacturers. But there's no way they're that different. After all, the composition and quality are almost the same. I told myself. This is temporary. It can be improved if we do it. But even after working all night for several days to adjust the process, the results were all the same. The numbers didn't change and the defect rate remained high. In the quiet room before dawn, I thought to myself. Could the technology we had been so proud of collapse just because of one different material? I didn't want to admit that our speed and efficiency were dependent on the Japanese system. The reality stuck in my throat and I couldn't swallow it. That day, my boss came to see me. Do something, Jin. The future of this country and this factory depends on you engineers. Quote. It sounds cool when you just hear the words. But in reality, it was just terror. From then on, my all-nighters continued. I tried everything. Temperature, pressure, sintering, decomposition, humidity, and duration. I don't know how many times I wrote and rewrote the formula, but the answer was always the same. Failure. One night, when I was too tired to think straight, I found a dirty envelope in the back of an old shelf. Written in yellowed hair was this: Tokyo Project Number 7. Inside were densely handwritten notes, numerical values that were too detailed, a meaningless correction point, a meaningless correction value. And this was written on the bridge. 0.1 is not an error, it is the soul. That was the message from the Japanese engineers. At that moment, all the strength left my body. I had been fooling myself the whole time. The Japanese way of doing things, slow and careful, and annoyingly strict. But we who laughed at 0.1 were the ones who were immature. I sat on the floor, clutching the memo, tears streaming down my face, unable to speak. That was when I finally realized. We had only thought we had surpassed Japan, but in reality we had never even caught up. Since finding that old memo, my values have been crumbling little by little. But humans are strange creatures. Even if we know it in our hearts, our pride gets in the way and we can't accept reality. I was the same. When I went to work the next day, everyone's faces were exhausted. That's because we had been constantly pressed by numbers and reality for several days without even a glimmer of hope. Alertons were flowing out of the production line. The red lights indicating defective products kept flashing as if the entire factory was warning us. 4 came to me. Mr. Self-Employed, yesterday's improvement proposal didn't work either. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The defect rate is 88.4%. It's getting worse. Numbers don't lie. Reality hits you mercilessly. An emergency meeting was held that afternoon. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, and no one joked or chatted. The department heads threw down the documents. We had been proud of the Korean model of speed and efficiency, but what is the current situation? We can't make anything just because Japanese materials have stopped coming. No one objected. The numbers weren't something we could refute. Another boss raised his voice. This is a national problem. We should retaliate against Japan. If we were independent enough to retaliate, we wouldn't be struggling. The room fell silent. It was a painful statement, but it was the truth. I kept asking myself, clasping my hands together under the desk. Had we really surpassed Japan? Or was it just that I wanted to think so? That question resonated heavily in the depths of my heart. When I returned to the break room, the villagers were murmuring. Maybe we've been misunderstanding this whole time. I reflexively denied it. No, that can't be right. We've done it. We've grown. We've protected the market. The numbers prove it. But wasn't it because we had Japanese materials, Japanese equipment, and Japanese standards that we were able to capture the market? Those words felt like a stab in the heart. I didn't want to admit it. But that memo floated in my mind. 0.1 isn't an error. It's the soul. Those words had my thoughts swaying. I went into the line room for another all-nighter. The temperature of the machine and the white light of the fluorescent lights created an atmosphere that was a mixture of drowsiness and despair. I reviewed the compounding calculations once more and checked the error in the maximum temperature control down to the millimeter. But no matter what I changed, it wouldn't behave the same as the different Japanese-made materials. 4 said, suppressing his disagreement. Something's missing. Theoretically, it's the same, but the results are completely different. It's as if there's something invisible. There's no such thing as invisible things. Everything can be explained with numbers. At moments like that, my heart ached. No, if everything could really be explained with numbers, we wouldn't be in this situation right now. Somewhere in my heart, I had begun to understand that. It was 2 a.m., and the factory grounds visible through the window of the line room were dark, and even the surrounding cityscape looked tired and hazy. I leaned my elbows on the workbench and muttered, I wonder what's going on. How can Japan produce things with such precision? Then, 4, who had been looking at the data next to me, said, I think it's not the speed, but the way in which they're accumulated. I turned to the side. 4 continued with a tired look on his face. We accumulated speed, efficiency, and results. But 4 accumulated the meaning of an error of 0.1, didn't he? I had no words to respond to those words. I clutched the old paper on my desk. That paper was asking us questions that transcended time. Do you have pride in something you've created solely for speed? Does technology that pursues only efficiency have soul? And for the first time, I thought, maybe we've been chasing numbers and not technology. My chest tightened. At that moment, something in my head began to crumble. As the days passed, the situation only got worse. The atmosphere in the factory was heavy, no one making eye contact. Even the new employees who were always cheerful and loud in greeting kept their heads down and silently entered and exited the room. The news covered this commotion every day, and commentators said whatever they wanted. The South Korean government should urgently cut off its dependence on Japan. Now is the time for domestic manufacturing. This is Japan's exposure. This is Japan's response. We should fight as a nation. These were just words. They were the voices of people who knew nothing about the suffering on the ground or the meaning of the numbers. Behind the scenes, stock prices continued to plummet like hell. Every time I looked at the monitor, my stomach tightened. And finally, the government held an emergency press conference. They would inject research and development support funds to accelerate domestic manufacturing. I laughed as I watched the TV. It's not about money. If you can buy it with money, you're especially catching up. I couldn't respond to those words. I thought we could catch up with money and speed. But I was wrong. The way we were stacking things up was different. One day, I was running to the factory in Trouble Tayo, and I saw a young new employee crying in front of the production line. That girl was usually cheerful and hardworking, and I had secretly high hopes for her. When I spoke to her, she trembled and said, "It's all a failure. No matter how much I change the settings, it wouldn't stabilize. Why does it fall apart like this just because the materials are different?" Quote, that question wasn't directed at me. It was a cry for help from the industry itself. I couldn't believe it. At those moments, my heart ached. Even though I was an engineer, I couldn't answer a single question. That night, in the conference room, we were forced to make a decision on whether to continue production or stop it. The line representative said with a trembling voice, "If we continue production like this, the deficit will only increase." Another person shouted, "But if we stop, the company will be finished." The discussion raged, and voices from the neighbors exchanged. I listened in silence. No one knew what was right anymore. Around 11 p.m., my boss came to me. He usually had a stern voice, but that day he was different. "Tell me honestly, can we produce the same quality as Japan with this domestically produced product?" Silence ensued. It wasn't time to think of an answer, but time to accept reality. I took a deep breath. It's impossible. We can't make it as it is now. At that moment, the strength drained from my boss's face. He collapsed into his chair and slowly closed his eyes. I see. That voice was the voice of someone who had accepted defeat. That night, after everyone had gone home, I stayed alone in the factory. As I stared at the production line that had stopped under the dim lights, I thought to myself. I had always believed that Korea was better than Japan. But wasn't that just an illusion of numbers and speed? On the desk was an old memo from a spirit. There's nothing wrong with rushing, but cutting down on necessary time is not skill. This was also the words of a Japanese engineer. That 1 minute pierced my heart. I had always thought that speed equaled success. Speed is certainly a weapon. But what is needed to achieve that speed? It's systems, integrity, understanding, verification, and accumulation. We had been skipping over that and running with a weak foundation. I finally realized. We had been chasing only results, not how to make things. The moment that fact hit me hard in my heart, something inside me collapsed with a loud noise. And then I made a decision. I won't run away, I'll face it, I'll search for the answer. That night, for the first time, I closed my eyes not in frustration but in determination. The next day, I holed up on the research island. I shouldn't have slept, but my mind was strangely clear. The me of yesterday would have only been thinking about how to recover. But this day was different. Why did we fail? Why can Japan do it but we can't? I was finally trying to see the cause. On the desk was the old eyes of a spirit, and I read it again. The contents were technical and some parts seemed outdated. But the ideas written there were not old. Materials are managed with numbers, but they have characteristics that cannot be explained by numbers alone. It is not an engineer to explain phenomena without understanding them with numbers. The more I read, the more I felt a warming sensation deep in my chest. I gasped when I saw the small lines written on the back of the memo. There is nothing more dangerous than rapid improvement. Only the emperor with zero error, built up little by little, will support the future. Those words were a complete denial of our approach. It was 4 p.m. Mr. Gigi's 23rd set of improvement proposals has been released. His voice was a mixture of fatigue and resignation. I took the documents and looked through them. The numbers weren't bad. No, in fact, there was improvement. I stopped writing with my pen. Should I scrape this plan? Huh? Why? The numbers have improved. Just the numbers. At that moment, 4's expression changed. Surprise, confusion, and a little understanding. I continued. It's not about improvement, it's about understanding. Why are the numbers like this? Why isn't this material stable? If we only pursue the results, we'll just keep making the same mistakes. Your way of thinking has changed. You have to change. We've always thought that we've acquired technology by stealing the form of the answer. The moment I said those words, my chest ached. As night fell, only I and a few other engineers remained from the research party. I wondered as I stared at the prototypes placed on the workbench in the quiet space. What had the Japanese engineers seen? What had they felt, and what had they stuck to that system to protect? I opened the old document file I was holding. Inside were the handover notes from the Japanese side, with whom I had once conducted joint research. The letters were neat and small, so detailed that it took me a while to read them. The following was written on the bridge of the page. If future generations come into contact with this emperor, those who think it is a detour will be the strongest. The moment I finished reading it, I was overcome with emotion. I had always made fun of detours. I thought it was a waste of time to take my time. But now I understood it all too well. People who take the shortest route are weak when they hit a wall, but people who have built up their skills by taking the long way know how to overcome the wall. It was 3:04 in the morning and I returned with coffee. Mr. G, if there really is an answer, where is it? It's in 0.1. 0.1? I always thought that 0.1 was just an error. But it wasn't. It was an ideology. John slowly sat down in his chair and silently pondered my words. Then he said quietly, I never thought that the day would come when I, a Korean, would learn from the Japanese technological ideology. I turned my gaze forward. Pride and competition are necessary, but a country that doesn't recognize what it is to learn has no future. Under the fluorescent light, the prototype sat quietly. What had shifted there was not our limits, but the wall we had to face. A few weeks passed. From that day on, we continued to understand rather than correct. Up until now, I would have been in a hurry to get results, but this time it was different. The work was slow, tedious, and time-consuming. But each and every step had meaning. One day, 4 let out a happy cry. Our numerical values had begun to stabilize. I peered at the screen and couldn't help but gasp. It still wasn't on par with Japanese materials, but it was clearly different from before. The defect rate had dropped significantly and reproducibility was emerging. It was the result of accumulating knowledge while understanding it as a phenomenon, not as a theoretical calculation. I said slowly, this is the right way to proceed. It's not far, but it's a walk we can be proud of. Quote, those words warmed my heart a little. The expressions gradually began to return to normal at the factory. No one was at the stage where they could be happy yet. But a path began to appear in the darkness. That was the atmosphere. At one meeting, a young staff member raised his hand and said, I have a question. Why didn't the old way work? Quote, the room fell silent. In the past, that was just how things were at the workplace. It was a question that would have been answered with memorization. I answered slowly, choosing my words carefully. We were only chasing numbers. We thought that fast, cheap mass production was success. But Japan was different. They piled up the reasons why it was like that. They made up reasons before answering. We listened with bated breath. It seemed like we were burdened with technology, but we were just copying the results. The moment I said those words, I felt like something I had been carrying was melting away. In the corner of line at night, I opened another old handwritten note. The letters were no longer just notes from the past. For me, they had become the psychology of an engineer. Technology is not something to be fought over. It is something to be inherited, refined, and passed on. The moment I read those words, I realized. I had always thought of Japan as someone to compete with. But in reality, they were someone I should learn from. My pride hurt. No, that's not it. It was respect, not regret. The next morning, I stood in front of everyone at the general meeting. My face was etched with fatigue, but my eyes were still filled with strength. I took a deep breath and said it clearly. We had been laughing at Japanese technology. But in reality, we were the ones being laughed at. No one moved. Everyone listened. Speed is important, efficiency is important, but without sincerity, it's not technology. We now understand what that means. 4 nodded quietly. I went last. From today on, we will not be engineers of speed, but engineers who accumulate sincerity. We will create understanding, not results. As soon as he said that, someone gave a small round of applause. Then another. And the sound spread throughout the factory. That sound was not applause for success. It was applause for the determination of the engineers who received it. At that moment, something deep in my heart definitely changed. I felt like my life as an engineer had begun. Various opinions were received from people overseas on this topic, so I would like to introduce some of them. Japan has a deep history as an engineer. They are not chasing perfection. They accept perfection as a responsibility. It is wonderful that they realize that 0.1 is not an error, but an idea. The Japanese truly have a wonderful spirit of craftsmanship. What did you think? Ji-san finally understood that technology cannot be expressed by numbers alone, but is something that is completed through the thinking behind it and the accumulation of effort. The answer he found was not success or defeat, but a willingness to learn and pride as an engineer. The respect and humility that were lost in the competition between countries were the essential qualities needed to pass on technology to the future. This story is not about which is better, Korea or Japan, but about the process of one engineer coming face to face with real technology and growing. Please let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next video. Senior Tae Jong's investigation report on the Fordu Bridge is out. The finger is seriously cracked. Here we go again. Wasn't it just repaired last year? That was just a temporary fix. No fundamental reinforcement was done. The other side is already worn down. Hello. This is Moko. We can no longer rely on Japan. The infrastructure that has developed throughout Korea is crying out for help. Please watch until the end to see the reality seen by one Korean civil servant as the structures that have supported the foundation of the nation are reaching their limits one after another. My name is Tae Jong. I'm a Korean civil servant. Lately, I've been in charge of infrastructure, and it's been a grind. Lately, whenever I see a small crack in the road, my heart starts pounding. The average person might not even notice it, but as someone in charge of infrastructure at a local government, I know all too well how dangerous that is. Today, I'm sipping coffee at my desk as I stare at a mountain of reports. All the bridges, tunnels, waterworks, and sewage treatment facilities across the country are reaching the end of their service life. Just a little while ago, it seemed like they'd be fine for another 10 years, but now it's becoming a reality that they could collapse in 10 days. My junior colleagues at work are rushing to bring me documents. The investigation report for the 4 major bridges, Bass Senior, has been released. It's a report of cracks. Here we go again. Didn't they just repair them last year? That was just a stopgap measure. They didn't do any fundamental reinforcements. And the budget has been cut. Sigh. All I can do is sigh. Budget, budget, budget. It's the same no matter where I go. It's not that they don't have the money, it's that they don't feel like spending it. To be precise, citizens complain about why the roads are still bumpy, but we don't just leave them like that. Even when we apply for a budget, our superiors tell us to consider the balance with other departments and not be extravagant in this economy, so everything gets put on the back burner. The sewage treatment plant in my hometown was built in 1978. It's been in the area for almost 50 years. The pipes are corroded, the cycle is terrible, and they overflow when it rains. But when we got the estimate for replacing them, it cost over 10 billion yen. They finished it without taking a nap. I remember last year's torrential rain. The drainage couldn't be drained properly, and the city center was completely submerged. That was a sign that the infrastructure had reached its limit. I remember complaining about the recent situation with my colleague Hyo over lunch. Tegan, you must have felt it by now. You must have felt it by now too. The infrastructure is starting to collapse. It's not just that we can feel it. It's at the level where it could collapse tomorrow. I've been thinking about going to Japan again to investigate. What, Japan? When I went to Tokyo 10 years ago, their sewage system management was terrible. They said it was because it's an earthquake-prone country, but honestly, I was envious. I've been to Japan before, and the road paving and heavy reinforcement were impressive. They have all the inspection and renewal timings recorded in data, and I couldn't help but ask how the budget is being spent on this. In comparison, in my town, there are children who use the same broken bridge every year to go to school. Who's going to take responsibility if it collapses? And even when I bring this up to the higher-ups, I always get the same response. Where are they going to get the budget to fix it? So are they going to wait until an accident happens before they take action? If an accident happens, the country will take action. No, this is giving me a headache. Also, recently, there was a buzz on SNS about how bad Korea's infrastructure is, and foreigners' posts have gone viral, causing tourists to cancel their reservations. Trust is hard to regain once it's lost. We on the ground are doing our best to postpone the collapse every day. We don't stand out, but we crawl under bridges to check for cracks, and go to check on old water tankers at night. Who's doing this kind of work? We are. But you know, we're reaching our limit. We have to make a big decision somewhere. At the very least, the whole country needs to change its mindset from fixing things after they break. Hyo said it again. If we can't rely on Japan, can't we at least learn from them? Not just retreat. I thought the same thing, but that's not the mood at the top. That's the worst part. In fact, updating infrastructure isn't just about pouring concrete again. Only when planning, prioritizing, training engineers, and maintenance routines are all in place can the veins of a country come to life. Politicians who don't understand this spend money on things like park maintenance to raise money, and don't pay attention to infrastructure that protects lives. My dad used to say, "You don't fix a bridge until people die. You fix it so that people don't die." Quote. I think that's true. But that kind of simple psychology is hard to get across in this country these days. Okay, let's head to the next site. Today, somewhere, a structure that I thought would last another 10 years might collapse in less than 10 days. I just want to stop that. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I wonder how far we, as a country, have really come in terms of technology. Of course, it looks amazing. There's even a concept building right next door. IT is glamorous, and every year, buzzwords like AI, the metaverse, and KMO are thrown around. But when it comes to the basics, infrastructure, manufacturing, materials, measurement, design, and other unglamorous but life-supporting technologies, I honestly wonder how far our country has come. I was slightly shocked when I read a report on Japanese technology last week. The underground facilities managed by the Tokyo Metropolitan Government's Sewerage Bureau are like works of art. Even though they were built 50 years ago, they use preventive sensors and internal systems to check their condition, and if there's even the slightest abnormality, they replace parts of them. What's more, everything is managed digitally, and AI even handles the downtime. And they've been doing that for years, so it's mind-blowing. Here, there are still cities where inspection results are reported by hand, but I was talking to Hayanori again during lunch break. You said you worked with a Japanese company on a redevelopment project in Seoul a while back, right? Oh, yeah, they were really detailed. And they even wrote down the reasons for everything on the blueprints. Reasons? Like, they said they were shifting this pipe 3 centimeters to the right in anticipation of future earthquakes. That would be considered excessive in our company. We'd probably get yelled at for going to such lengths. I laughed, but somewhere deep down I was sweating. In other words, we're being asked to complete things in the short term, while they're working with an eye toward long-term safety. And one more thing about the economy. Did you see the news recently that South Korea's GDP growth rate is 0.9%? Seriously, that's not enough to call it an advanced country. In contrast, Japan's economic stagnation is so severe and its industrial base is so strong. The difference is in the quality of the real economy. For example, in the manufacturing industry, while Korea has strengths in parts-by-part processing systems, quality assurance of materials, and meticulous supply chains, and in producing finished products in a short period of time, Japan is strong in the entire process leading up to completion. In other words, we compete on appearance and speed, while they compete on structure and sustainability. What a difference. For example, if we take the capacitors used in smartphones, there are many cases where they cannot be assembled without Japanese characteristics. There is a tremendous amount of technology that is supported behind the scenes, but is not visible on the surface. This was frustrating. When I learned that a new Korean-made train had a Japanese-made motor control device, I realized that while there are some things to be proud of, the reality is that we still rely on other countries for parts. Moreover, such facts are not often reported. Instead, the only news that comes up is that the quasi-domestic content rate has increased. Can you really say that this is growth? Do suddenly blurted out this. Senior, is it really impossible to learn from Japan anymore? Who decided that it was politically impossible? Really? Well, the half-day mood has been getting stronger again recently, and if I try to go learn, I get a new Japanese release. What the heck is that? Isn't technology something that's built up across borders? Who benefits from bringing politics into the equation? If we don't have the attitude to learn from where we can, we'll just keep being a country that just imitates. Also, my colleague who recently went to the Ministry of Economy said, "Dagon, the budget for your department might be cut considerably." Why? Because of diplomatic friction, parts procurement from Japan has stopped, so we'll be assigned to deal with that. Quote, what the heck? It only takes a moment to break something, and it takes 10 to 20 years to realize it and fix it. It's the same for technology and the economy. What we need now isn't self-imposed restraint or pride. I think it's the courage to face reality and take a step forward with our feet firmly planted on the ground. But that's something that this country finds difficult to do. To be honest, I used to be able to study for half a day straight. It's partly because of what I learned in history class, the influence of my family, and the news on TV. Japan is a bad country. I was always told that they hadn't apologized, and I never questioned it. There was a year when the No Japan movement was in full swing in college, and everyone was out of business with Uniqlo and throwing trash on Japan. They were burning with a strong sense of justice. So I also went to a convenience store and found cups and instant noodles with "Made in Japan" written on them, and took them off the shelves. Thinking back on it now, I wonder what that was all about. I understand how they felt. They wanted to be angry. They wanted to keep the history from being forgotten. But now that I'm in this position, I realize that there's surprisingly little to be gained by acting on emotion alone. Recently, there's been a growing mood among young people to eliminate Japaneseness, and I've even seen comments saying that just using them is a sign of treason. But in reality, 80% of the sensor equipment I use for my job is made in Japan. The other day, the machine I used to measure the air chambers in tunnels broke down, so I tried to replace it, but when I looked for something with the same performance from a domestic manufacturer, I was told that the system and durability weren't good enough, and that the delivery time would be over 2 months. So what did I end up doing? Our manager secretly imported products from Japan and is using them. Don't make it public. It'll be a pain if it gets found out. What? Seriously? Then I won't write this in the report. Just say that it's been procured. Don't mention the country of manufacture. How pathetic. They say they're eliminating it, but they're using it normally. Their pride on the surface and the reality behind it are completely at odds. Now they're making excuses. They say it was an emergency, so it was an exception, or that it didn't have the same performance requirements. But some of the people who found out about it are getting more and more angry. Why aren't you making it domestically? You're saying we should develop the technology. If we could do that, we would have done it a long time ago. Too many people don't understand that it takes time and investment to develop it. In the first place, we're putting pressure on Japan for political reasons to get rid of the materials and parts that Japan supplies, which worsens our relationship and ends up causing us trouble. There was a city that issued a half-day ordinance every time, and it said that all Japanese equipment would be removed, but a month later it was back to normal. The reason is that more than half of the fire prevention equipment and earthquake-resistant devices were Japanese. As a result of spending a lot of money to change everything to Korean, malfunctions occurred frequently, which actually increased the residents' anxiety. As someone on the ground, I don't mean to say that Hanji is bad. But when you just rush ahead based on politics and emotions, technology in the field suffered the most. And that's not all. It was bad economically too. When the No Japan movement was in full swing, tourism exchanges with Japan plummeted and air routes were reduced. As a result, the economies of tourist destinations cooled down and transactions with Japanese companies were frozen. Imports also decreased dramatically, and what happened was that prices went up and consumers suffered. The impact was particularly severe on reactionary materials and scientific materials. When imports of reactionary photoresists from Japan stopped, our country's major companies panicked. Some factories almost stopped operating. The media reported that domestic production had been successful, but on the ground, there were voices everywhere saying that the product was still in the testing stage and could not withstand production. That was a tightrope walk for us. I thought at that time, if something like that happens again, I might not be able to endure it this time. I can't forget the words that Hyo once said. Aren't we cutting ourselves off? Yes, we are. And proudly. Of course, Korean engineers and companies are also working hard. I'm proud of them too and want to believe in them. But if emotional national movements and political decisions continue to crush them, the engineers' reputation will decline. No one will use them anyway. Who will seriously develop them if people think they'll go back to making them in Japan? Politicians say extreme things because they want to win elections, and the people are moved by past emotions, but we on the ground are just silently fixing a crumbling bridge. There was a time when I thought that was a way to protect the country, but now I can't help but feel that it's actually the one that's breaking it down. I wonder when we stop being able to distinguish between emotions and facts. Why is Japan so cold? My colleagues have been asking me this a lot recently, but to be honest, I think it's only natural. After all, we've always been the ones who've been acting inappropriately. We only bow our heads and ask for help when we're in trouble, and then when it suits us, we yell at them, asking if they've forgotten the past. If this were an individual or a human being, we'd immediately cut off all ties. It's the same for a country. You see, Japan has always valued its national interests above all else. It's a country that doesn't let emotions get the better of it. Before people say that this is cold, I think they should take a good look at what they've done. Just last week, our department had an emergency meeting. The topic was about resuming technical cooperation with Japan. In fact, there was talk of receiving technical support from Japan for an infrastructure project, but the other party's response was that trust needs to be rebuilt before they can cooperate. Rebuilding trust? In other words, empty apologies aren't enough. This means that we need to keep our promises first. Japan has always been consistent. We help others as long as it doesn't harm our own interests. However, if that help is taken advantage of, we draw a clear line. That's our diplomatic stance. We in Korea have always taken it lightly. We thought that they would help us when we were in trouble. But that myth has been shattered. Remember the currency swap agreement? In the past, Japan agreed to it many times, but recently, we haven't even been able to reach an agreement. For some reason, we can't work with a country we can't trust. Hyo was complaining about it before. Hasn't Japan abandoned its image as a kind neighbor? Or maybe it's more like a parent who doesn't spoil its children. I get it, it's like pushing you away and telling you to take responsibility for your own mistakes. In fact, Japan has been promoting new economic partnerships with Asian countries recently, and Korea's presence is honestly weak. It's strengthening its ties with ASEAN and strengthening its defense and technology cooperation framework with Australia. The saying that Korea is the only isolated country in Asia is becoming a reality. Even so, Korea won't give up on Japan. The dissolution of the Comfort Women Foundation, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs lawsuit against the Takashima issue. All of these are examples of unilaterally breaking agreements with Japan, and they justified it by saying that public sentiment would not allow it. But you know, if you conduct diplomacy based on emotion, you can't run a country. If the other party doesn't keep their promises, you don't have to keep yours either. With that kind of thinking, you won't be trusted by any country. To begin with, I think Japan's national interests are recognized based on trust. That's why we always prioritize promises and continuity when making decisions. On the other hand, what about us? Every time the leader changes, our policies and attitudes change all the time. Yesterday they were saying that it was effective, but today they're saying that the apology for colonial rule was insufficient. Of course, no one will listen to us. One day, I happened to have a chance to talk to an embassy employee and asked him casually, "What do you honestly think of South Korea?" I think they're a country that doesn't try to learn. Well, a country that refuses to learn about its past, its present, or its future makes you want to distance yourself from it. They're rotten. But I couldn't deny it. Because that's exactly right. Japan has set aside its emotions to protect its national interests, but we have been putting our emotions on display and eroding trust in that way. That difference is the difference between Japan and South Korea today. It's the distance between Japan and South Korea now. The D slipped out again. Senior, if the day comes when Japan seriously abandons Korea, what will happen to us? At that time, we will probably be on the front lines and know everything. It's ironic, but that's the reality. It's natural for Japan to keep its distance in order to protect its national interests. If we don't stop that, we first have to become a country that people can trust. And the first step to that isn't apologizing or prostrating ourselves. I think it's about keeping our promises. Only when we do that can we become neighbors again. It felt like it had finally come. To be honest, I was shocked the moment I read the document that arrived on my desk that day, a document of support for the Japanese government. After all, just a few months ago, the news and SNS were making a big fuss about Japan being the enemy and economic invasion, so now they're asking for help. It's no joke. The content of this document is also amazing. It says that the local infrastructure is expected to reach its limits in the next 10 years, so they're asking for Japan's technical support and financial cooperation. And it's also a vague idea of re-establishing a forward-looking cooperative relationship between the two countries. No, that's too convenient. If a country that has repeatedly broken promises, excluded Japanese products, and evacuated Japan with the cooperation of the public and private sectors were to wrap it up in words like, future thinking, only when it's in trouble, I'd be pissed. When I told Hayanori about this, he slammed the table and laughed. Hey, you should say, excuse me, first before saying, please help me. So what kind of diplomacy is it that protects national pride? Pride is about not letting others know. But isn't it? Japan will help us again anyway. No, I feel like it'll be different this time. Yes, up until now, Japan has certainly reached out to us. But now, the repeated betrayals on the Korean side have piled up and it's reached its limit. Japan has changed too. In fact, if you look at the commentators in the Japanese media, there are more and more voices saying that we shouldn't respond to an untrustworthy country. The voices on the internet are also getting louder, and even in the Junhoi, the evaluation of Korea has become considerably harsher. And yet we are trying to request support as if it's the right thing to do. Or maybe we think it's the right thing to do. This country has no sense of crisis at all, and they have the attitude that if we're in trouble, it's the right thing to help. They don't realize the arrogance behind it. That's why I thought, this is a request for support that should be rejected. Think about it calmly. If support comes from Japan now, it will be the same thing all over again. They won't be grateful for the help they received, and they'll complain that it wasn't enough. They'll complain that they could have given more, and a few years later they'll start saying that Japan is trying to make them feel indebted, and that will only worsen relations again. We have to put an end to this cycle. If they really want Japan to support them, they should do what they're supposed to do first. They should work to restore trust, apologize, abide by past treaties, and bow their heads and ask to learn from them. If they can't even do that, it's only natural that this request for support should be rejected. I took the plunge and went to my boss. Section Chief, I'm against this very idea. I'm embarrassed. What are you talking about? Think realistically. We don't have enough technology or money. So first, we should show our sincerity as a country. If things continue as they are, we'll end up using Japan again. Hey, don't interfere in my work based on your personal beliefs. This isn't about beliefs, it's about trust. The chairman remained silent. But his silence said it all. I withdrew from the official document drafting process for this request for assistance. I no longer wanted to be involved in work that would tarnish my name. Of course, my withdrawal alone might not have much of an impact on the majority. It's important to show, even in a small voice, that this is not the way things should go. Assistance is built on trust. Before we cry out for help because we're in trouble, we should ask ourselves whether we have gained enough trust to be helped. If we can't do that, no one will respond no matter how much we reach out. And I think that's only natural. Various opinions were received from people overseas on this topic, so I'd like to introduce some of them. Koreans are not new to being ungrateful, but if they know they need to rely on someone, they should be more sincere. I think Japan and Korea are very friendly countries outside of politics. We enjoy each other's cultures, so I can't bear to see that falling apart because of politics. What did you think? What awaited us after pushing forward with emotion and a half-day plan was a loss of trust. It seems that Taejeon has also faced reality, but he may have realized it a little too late. Is there a future before he refuses to learn? Please let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next video.